Hi, this is Jeff Nyquist, and this is another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm in the United States. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. Uh, we talk about current events, politics, philosophy, and the crisis that's ongoing in what appears to be a pre-World War situation in Europe and possibly the Far East. Alex, you've been looking into some events there. What are you seeing?
Okay, so I think the mole situation is much worse than it was in the Cold War and even before the Cold War. I mean, we've covered some of the all-time, great cases of massive traitors, from the Cambridge Five to even up to the head of British MI5 intelligence. We've covered even guys like Lord Louis Mountbatten with his communist wife Edwina, who had his special channels to Moscow, and he seemed to have screwed everything up for NATO. And his buddy became first Secretary General of NATO, and some other Secretaries Generals of NATO were highly suspect. Now, it may be just a few years until World War III. The mole situation seems to be worse, and there's another huge disadvantage with it, which is the oversaturation, especially on the internet, because it's open 24/7, and there's not like 200 cable channels like in the past, or like in Germany we had like 30 cable channels. Now it's millions and millions of channels, and everybody can just become an influencer overnight. So there's a constant barrage of material, and it's usually something that's already popular. Now, when I started to publish things on the internet, that was more than 20 years ago, there was really no social media. It was just, however you could spread material. Rent a server, have material on there for people to download, or use file sharing. You have a stack of files on your computer, and other people with a simple program, they could download from you and other people and then share it to the next people. So it was very decentralized, and there was no algorithm, right? And people could just get the stuff for free, and if they liked it, they would download some more. But when I started to publish things more than 20 years ago, so we're talking like just pretty much almost the end of the first term of George W. Bush. Okay, so the internet was still kind of young. It was still lots of people that didn't have internet at home, and then people that did have internet, it was still metered, right? People remember that, especially younger people. So you couldn't have endless downloads and uploads for $40 a month or $50 a month. It was metered. It's like a collect call or something. When you would have to measure, okay, if I download this file, it's going to cost me like $10, $15, $20. If I run this all throughout the month, it's going to cost me like $200, $500. So back then, there was not a lot of material that people were producing, right? So people would scan old conspiracy books and then let you download the scan, right? So you could just browse through this old conspiracy book from the 90s or even the 80s, right? Then people started to digitize them, so it was more convenient in a text file. First MP3 files, and it was first a few videos here and there. This was like what it was, and you had to look for it. You had to know where to find it, and it wasn't a lot, right? And it was completely different, like it's today. And even back then, it was always the same stuff. It was I was looking for not just the great books, great nonfiction books about espionage and the empires and the techniques and how this all works. I was not just looking for that. I was also trying to widen the net. Okay, so I wanted to find some people that would do current content, so to say, not just release a book every few years, but do something every week or every month, right? But most of what I could find back then, outside of really good books, was just the same old that's been around for decades. The Jewish thing, the moon landing, and the the Kennedy assassination and blah, 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 blah. It's been around forever. And so over the last more than 20 years, the same stuff keeps repeating, but it's amplified to a degree that is bigger than ever before. And it's this oversaturation.
It's an intellectual degeneration of discourse. This degeneration, I know people who are intelligent, but maybe not well read in history, maybe not very thoughtful in their education in the social sciences, and they would recommend a book like this to you. David Ray Griffin, Cognitive Infiltration. It's a giant counter argument against a guy named Sunstein, who's debunked the 9/11 truther movement. And this guy it's a polemic, but its substance is almost nothing. I mean, and of course there's a professor, I put it on my website a couple of years ago, who goes through all the 9/11 truther stuff piece by piece with photographic evidence, with the data and everything, showing how it's just it evaporates. The whole 9/11 truther movement is just a bunch of misunderstandings and misreadings.
If it
and
was like that, I mean, I remember that name from even like 20 years ago, right? I mean, it's always these people have been around forever. If kind of the traditional conspiracy mythology was correct, right? The elders of Zion and these little tiny individuals and tiny groups taking everything over because they have actually no special techniques. Everything they supposedly use as techniques was old and everybody was using it, but somehow they magically took over the world. If that was actually true, if there was this big Jewish conspiracy, you would have never really noticed. You would have never really noticed any Jewish people, and they would have had total dictatorship already, especially in the U.S.
Yeah, since they're so good that nobody can detect them. There's no real.
They have endless money. They're everywhere. The Mossad can do anything. So why isn't America a complete dictatorship? Why is it still, why are they wasting so much time? Why did they have to spend so many centuries, scheming and doing this and doing that, if they're so all powerful and they're everywhere? Right.
Well, the thing is that what people don't realize, the history of the Jews were a pariah people under the Roman Empire. Everybody back then were pagans. The Jews, and they were polytheists. They believed in a pantheon of gods. The Greeks, the Romans, the Carthaginians, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, they believed in all this. The Jews had one God. They were very strict in, no idolatry, no idols, very much differentiated. Well, when you're a relatively small people, well, they really weren't. 1 in 10 people in the Roman Empire were Jewish. People don't realize that. The Jews were a much larger percentage. Jews are now what? They're like 1%, less than 1% of the world population, I believe. I think there's some fraction
40,
of a single percentage. I think what is it? 20 million Jews in the world with 8 billion people. Do the math. If there were, it's just not. They're just not. But in the ancient world, being 1 in 10 people were Jewish, they were a big deal, and they were very fanatical in their monotheism in the views of the Romans. The Romans, if you read. Livy, for example, Titus Livius, the famous guy who wrote the complete history of Rome from Romulus and Remus on to actually even before that, how Rome got established. In his description of Hannibal, he said that Hannibal had more than Punic perfidy, and like all Semitic peoples, possessed of fanaticism, right? Well, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, were Semites, just like the Jews, like the Assyrians, like the Babylonians. They were Semites. And this was the view the Romans, the European Romans, had of Semites. They were fanatics, whether they were polytheists or not. And so the Jews, being unusual, being monotheists, were considered by the Romans. So the Romans ended up fighting these 2 terrible wars with the Jews. There was more than that. Pompey the Great besieged Jerusalem and took it, and installed his friend Herod the Great. But it was it was the Jewish War, which was a rebellion at the time of Nero that was extremely costly in manpower and wealth. They sent Vespasian, one of the toughest Roman generals. He had fought famously in Britain, in the conquest of Britain, to go to Palestine and subdue the Jewish rebellion. There's a famous account, Josephus's account of this Jewish rebellion. Josephus was a Jewish commander who switched sides, who supposedly had a vision that Vespasian would become the next emperor. And Vespasian did become the next emperor, so one wonders how much confabulation was put into this story. And of course, ancient history is full of this kind of thing. But the Jews were this pariah people. And then there was, when Trajan died, upon conquering the Parthians, or Persia, what we know today as Persia, he died at the end of that campaign. The Jews had control of Cyprus, and there was a massive rebellion then, and that was horrifically bloody. The Jews were expelled from the Holy Land. They were dispersed throughout the Roman Empire. They were crushed, just crushed. And of course, Christianity was emerging very gradually at that time. And of course, the idea of what people don't realize is what you might call a Christian, and this is controversial. You remember, Nero killed the Christians and blamed them for putting Rome on fire. Well, a Christ means Messiah, and the Jewish rebels believed in a Messiah, but they believed in a warlord Messiah, not in a Jesus Christ crucified on the cross Messiah. They believed. So there is the question that some have asked, well, is this firing of Rome, was this done by the rebels that they shortly thereafter fought? And, there's some confusion about the history and possible falsifications of texts, but the Jews were this terrible problem. Imagine 1 in 10 people belong to a religion that has a violent.
Well, the Germans became a problem for Rome too. I mean, the Germans, the Germanics, were very fanatic, also very crafty. Because it was so cold here. We had to invent things. We had to come up with some new stuff. To make things work. And the Romans saw us kind of in a similar way, right? I mean, it's like, who are these crazy people that live in the north where it's so cold?
And you crazy Germans, it's funny, Hitler, who persecuted the Jews and was into all this anti-Semitism and took advantage of this ancient, because the Jews continued to be a pariah people when Christianity took over the Roman Empire. So it wasn't just bad enough that they were the monotheists in a polytheistic world, but when the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, they were the ones that rejected Christ compared to the Roman Empire that was worshiping Christ. So then they were pariahs again. They were still cast in this role.
But there were so many others. Yeah, but there were so many others that played the same games, played by the same rules, because there was no other game, really. I mean, the world was such a big place, and you had the Asians, the Han Empire, the China, right? You had the Han Empire pretty much at the same time as the Roman Empire, and they never really even met.
Actually, I think there was a skirmish somewhere out in
some little stuff, yeah.
But then there was some kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, the Asians were playing. The Asians were playing the game fairly well. They developed all kinds of imperial techniques. They developed or further developed the intelligence game, the spying game, the psychological game. So there was a lot of really powerful development stuff going on with the Asians. Then, of course, after the end of the Western Roman Empire, a lot of that money and know-how, it kind of shifted to Europe. And then people started new empires and played the game, and especially advanced spy techniques and intelligence techniques, even though it's really hard to reconstruct.
But so I might point out that Adolf Hitler, what I was saying, who was an anti-Semite, he was a German Messiah. He referred to the 1,000-year reign or the 1,000-year Reich, and that's like the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, right? This is messianic language that
Building
the
himself
Nazis
the
used.
temples and planning even bigger
Right,
temples that people would remember in
right,
2,000 years, not
right.
just 1,000.
So it's funny that the Nazis themselves were in a way imitating the structures of Jewish thought in creating their own messianic idea of themselves as the
Yeah,
chosen people, right?
yeah, yeah.
The Nazi Reich was the Reich
Mm.
of the chosen people, the Aryans.
And
So this is very
mythologizing
odd.
even the origin of the Germanic or Aryan people. Like when they would come up with even more and more spectacular ideas where we actually came from, like this lost civilization and this
Well, didn't Heinrich Schliemann find when he found Troy there were swastikas in the rubble of some layer of Troy?
Ultima Thule and all this mythology. So I think you're spot on with copying things, because everybody was copying things from everybody
Copying and
else, right?
pasting. Yep.
So it's like, I mean, like Germans, Aryans, we only supposed to marry each other and have children with each other, and everybody who's not like us physically is kind of the enemy, and or just
Very
too different,
xenophobic, by the way.
or just too different.
Which,
so
by the way, people describing Semites, the Arabs, and the Jews back in the day would say they were xenophobic, and so the Germans become xenophobic. I mean, and of course, any people that's a pride people, that's isolated, that's persecuted, that's invaded and conquered and trampled down, you could see how the psychology could develop and this reputation. And of course, this is the thing: the Jews become a scapegoat because two factors. Hannah Arendt pointed this out. Two factors why they become a scapegoat is because the Jews, because they spoke Hebrew and they cultivated their ancient language, which wasn't. It's basically, was only cultivated for ethnic. Keeping them together as a people, the Jews could go outside of national borders. As Europe had this patchwork of languages, of vernacular languages, but the aristocracy learned Latin. The church and the aristocracy, they learned Latin as a common tongue, so they could all speak to each other. All the princes could speak to each other. The German princes could speak to the French and the Spanish and the Italian princes in Latin. And the Jews had this in common. They could speak to each other in communicate in Hebrew. So the Jews became very useful to the aristocracy. And of course, as you've pointed out, in terms of espionage and the spycraft of the Dark and Middle Ages, the favored spies were Jews. The people used as intermediaries and agents were Jews, homosexuals, and of course people who practiced black magic, people who were into the occult. Why? Because those are all pariahs. And spying has been considered in morally strict times. Spying is considered an evil kind of activity.
But it became like spy for hire, right? Because I mean, if people get into the recorded history of intelligence, I mean, of course, there's like the older eras where we don't have the same type of paper files to go through, but it's like what does a proper spy agency, a real spy service, what does it need? It needs a national state. It needs the ability to falsify documents, falsify birth certificates, and create false legends, false histories, false papers, and equip people with, let's say, diplomatic papers so you can send them abroad and they have special protection. Now, all that stuff and all these empires, they had this opportunity, and some of these aristocrats, they go back more than 1,000 years. They kept things very tight in their own family, so you could not really penetrate them as well. But if you're a Jewish group here, a Jewish group there, a Jewish group there, you don't have state power. You don't have the ability to falsify records and just play the game. Really, it's like you can become a spy for hire for the aristocracy, and you can haggle out a deal with the aristocracy. If I spy for you, which is an offer I can't refuse for obvious reasons. If I spy for you, the whole Jewish community in that specific town gets rewarded. You know, we don't get treated as badly as we would be otherwise treated.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like surrendering to the circumstances. Okay, I become a spy. Fine. So some Jewish person was becoming a spy to spy on this Jewish community for the aristocracy and report what's been going on in the Jewish community. You know, is there something funny going on? Are there new people coming in? Is somebody disguising his Jewishness and moving around? We shouldn't be moving around according to the rules. So
it should be, and it should be emphasized that what it means to be a pariah people, what a real burden this is. This is from Norman Cohen, Warrant for Genocide. I recommend this book to anybody who wants to understand this issue of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the Jewish conspiracy myth and its origins, because this scholarship can really trace these things quite easily, quite readily. And what he writes is the propagation of such views that the Jews are demons by the clergy, century after century, gradually but decisively influenced the attitude of the laity. If Judaism, with its profound sense of election and its elaborate system of taboos, tended in any case to make Jews into a people apart, Christian teaching and preaching ensured that they would be treated not simply as strangers, but as a most dangerous enemy. During the Middle Ages, Jews were almost wholly without legal rights and were frequently massacred by the mob. Such experiences, in turn, greatly encouraged the Jewish tendency to exclusiveness. During the long centuries of persecution, Jews became a wholly alien people, compulsorily restricted to the most sordid trades, regarding the Gentile world with bitterness. In the eyes of most Christians, these strange creatures were demons in human form, and some of the demonology that was woven around them in those centuries was proved extraordinarily durable. And this is important to understand this background, the dehumanization and the demonization of the Jews. And you mentioned Robeson, and who wrote about the Bavarian Illuminati.
Proofs of a conspiracy.
Right. But actually, he met with the Abbé Beruel, who was a French clergyman who really originated in sort of the first sort of form. He kind of cobbled together various sources. He had this Simonini letter, which claimed there was that there was the Jews had created the Masonic lodges, it was just this letter that made this bizarre claim, which was not true. The founders of the Masonic lodges were not Jews, and in fact, what the Abbey was trying to prove was that the French Revolution. He'd written a book saying the French Revolution was a conspiracy of the Masonic lodges, and it's very funny because the Masonic lodges at the time, majority of them were Catholic. Right.
Yeah.
And which is odd. And you know probably more about this than I do. But the claim was that all of these people were Jews, and of course, and that all these foreign ministers, all these ministers, and all these royal governments in Europe, they always had a Jew who was standing behind, and there was a secret council of Jews and Masons. There were 9 Jews always, 21 on the council, 9 Jews. There was a grand master in charge of everything, and they were running the world. And every court had like a secret group of these people behind it telling them what to do. I mean, it was really crazy, but this got propagated as an idea. But Beruel met with Robeson, heard that Robeson was going to write about the Illuminati, and he one-upped him by getting out his book first. And then, of course, it's just an incredible myth created by people who didn't understand the issues and didn't have the facts.
It's like as if the French had no idea about intelligence really and spying, and the British had no real idea about spying, and the Germans and the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Asians, nobody really understood the spy game, but these little Jewish groups, they were the best at it. They just had this tradecraft, ready, and they just took it all over because everybody else was a moron. Really, in Europe for millennia, literally, in Europe, it's like this. The more educated you are, I mean, it's, when it comes to the school and university and the people you associate with, the higher your status in society and your education level, the more you are encouraged to be interested in the Roman Empire and the whole tradition of the Roman Empire. Is supposed to worship the whole thing, basically. And so the idea that Jewish people invented Freemasonry is so ludicrous because these structures have been, or these techniques have been around for millennia. And it's like when Freemasonry was, or let's say British Masonry was formally created, there were elements in it that sounded like the Old Testament, or footnotes from the Old Testament, some bits and pieces from the Old Testament. But this was meant to make it look more normal to the new members, right? Because it's like, yeah, it's like Jewish, it's like somewhat Christian and kind of universal. It sounds pretty normal. And, you know, Masonry will accept you if you believe in any sort of religion. I mean, most lodges do. But this Old Testament stuff in conventional Freemasonry, that was just a door opener. Because if you get into, you know, some Old Testament stuff, you were encouraged to look further and say, oh, well, there were much bigger empires around at the time. And they were just as fascinating or even more fascinating than these tiny little Jewish entities at the time. So what about the Greek? What about the Romans? What about the Egyptians? What about the Babylonians? It's all so exciting, right? And they all had these secret societies, and they were recruiting members. And it's like, you can use the most seemingly boring organization to spy. It doesn't have to be a fancy lodge with the costumes and the ornaments, during the rituals, and it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, you can use Masonry for espionage, like you can use any group, any sort of vehicle for espionage. I mean, we know about boring-looking import-export companies being a spy front, or individuals looking like boring bookkeepers, but they're the spies, right? They're the guys that nobody's supposed to see. So it's like, the conspiracy authors, they're talking to people who have no idea about the spy game, and they're telling them that Jewish people almost invented the spy game, or they were the best hundreds of years ago and everybody else was a moron. And now, because of the internet, it's such a mass phenomenon, and it's like there's a variation of it for the Muslims, there's a variation of it for the extreme right wing, there's a variation for it for the communists, but it's always the same thing. I mean, we know that the communists started this, or really revolutionized anti-Semitism in the early 1800s, and then they sort of dialed it down. And instead of having the Jew as the blood-sucking capitalist parasite, they just took the little Jew attribute out, and that's why we are left with this communist concept of the evil capitalist, pig, and imperialist. So they just took the little Jewish attribute out of it, but the rest remain intact. I mean, I've studied so many conspiracy books from different eras, and they're so similar for a different audience. It's like Lego bricks. You can assemble a construct for a specific target audience, and you just add a few more pieces. You leave away a few more pieces, and that's that. And then you build another version for another target audience, right? And so when I started to publish things more than 20 years ago, after the first term of George W. Bush, there was almost no current content. People were scanning old conspiracy books, putting them online, maybe some audio programs. But then came social media, and everybody was starting to podcast, everybody was starting to film themselves and rehash this old material. And now we're at that point of oversaturation. What is the statistical chance of finding and liking and be interested in content by you, content from me, and what is the statistical chance of finding this content that's been around for centuries and that's been tailored to target audiences. I mean, it's like the chance is almost 100%. You will end up with some of these very typical categories, and the more the stuff gets repeated, the harder it is to find the good stuff about the real spy game and the real spy techniques. I mean, Joe Rogan, the super successful podcaster, Rogan has come under fire. I mean, he's been having guests on, and it's about the ancient pyramids and ancient aliens and the UFOs and more aliens and right-wing historical revisionism and the Russians are really the good guys, and just on and on and on and on and on. There's never a new idea. There's never new material. And and whenever Joe Rogan is confronted about some of these guests, he says, "Well, I'm stupid. I'm just a podcaster. I'm just having conversations. I'm not responsible for anything. I don't take any accountability whatsoever. I'm just talking to people with no real staff, no experts, nobody that really knows about these things." And I've looked when Joe Rogan got that Spotify deal, right? They said $100 million over a span of a certain amount of years. $100 million for an MMA fighting expert talking to celebrities and talking to these some total weirdos in front of millions of people. When I heard about the Spotify deal, I looked at who owns or created Spotify. And the founder of Spotify is the Swedish billionaire Daniel Ek, who studied at the Royal Swedish Institute of Technology. His partner is Martin Lorentzon. In 2013, Lorentzon participated in the Prince Daniel's Fellowship Project. 2016, he was elected a member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. And Lorentzon's companies, which are linked to Spotify and Telia, are located in offshore financial centers. And of course, Brits, they've perfected the system of offshore, corporations and banking. Some of these, specific aristocrats. And before privatization, Telia was a state telephone monopoly. Goes back to the Swedish Royal Telegraph Administration. And so this is kind of like a very elite background of Spotify, and they're paying all that money to Joe Rogan so he can repeat this old stuff that was around over 20 years ago when I started to put out content.
Yeah,
it was available decades early and even hundreds of years earlier.
What's amazing, what people need to realize is that the expression of resentment from people as modernity came on. Remember, you had, with Sir Isaac Newton and Galileo and the rest, you had secularization. You had this idea of the universe. You had materialism followed by positivism. You had the Enlightenment. You had the French Encyclopedists. You had the doctrines of the church questioned. And you had modernity. You had industrialization. So you had this tremendous change from the time of Columbus discovering the New World and the opening up of the New World. We've had since then more than 5 centuries of intensive change. And of course, in that change, the Jews went from this pariah, demonized people to, along with the doctrines of the rights of man, freedom, saying, why are these people ghettoized? Why are these? And of course, what do Jews want? Well, they want to be able to live like other people. They don't want to be. Do you want to be a pariah? No. You want to be emancipated. You want to be able to have rights, legal rights, which they didn't have in the Middle Ages. They didn't want to be forcibly forced into the Catholic Church as they were in Spain, conversos, people who were, you're going to face the Inquisition. What are you going to do? So what you ended up having is you had people had this following conclusion. They said, oh, we don't like these changes. We're losing our privileges, and it's all very scary and mixed up. Our religion's being challenged. And look at who's getting the advantage. The Jews are losing their pariah status. The Jews must be behind all this. Sure. I mean, that's literally the argument, because it's a cui bono argument. Oh, modernity favors the Jews because now they're locked out of their bottle. The ghettos, Napoleon's armies came into Italy and knocked down the Jewish ghettos, and the Jews are liberated.
I mean,
So
who is
the French
celebrating?
Revolution and Napoleon. Napoleon was accused of being a Jewish agent.
I mean, who is celebrating? Who is celebrating really when Spotify, with that elite background, Swedish aristocracy and billions of dollars or billions of euros, or some other powerful entities, when they put money into Joe Rogan, and when Joe Rogan has these guests on about the ancient aliens, pyramid stuff, and some extreme right-wing guys and mystical this, and take the blessing of drugs like LSD and other psychedelic drugs. I mean, who is celebrating that this content is now so much bigger than it was 20 years ago? Who is celebrating this? The Russians must be celebrating this. The Chinese must be celebrating this, because the underlying current of everything, every single one of these elements that is constantly repeated, the underlying core is always the system is keeping the great stuff, keeping it from you. So
the capitalist system is locking you down.
And the government knows about. Yeah, and the government knows about the ancient aliens, and that the creating energy out of thin air, and
free
creating
energy is now deprived from you.
So we could have heaven, we can have paradise on earth, which is a Marxist concept, as we discussed in the previous episode. We can have kind of like and Rogan basically is a Marxist. He's been a Marxist for decades. He's said so himself. He's actually a socialist. So we could have this paradise on earth. Free energy, free everything because of alien technology, and everybody's just smoking weed all day, taking LSD, taking cold plunge baths. We could have a great life, but they are keeping all that away from us. So it doesn't matter if you get into ancient aliens or current UFO stuff, or this, that, moon landing, blah, 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 or any of the other stuff that's promoted on Rogan. Doesn't matter what you get into, it's always the same. We could have heaven on earth, but they are keeping it from you. It could all be so easy.
And see, this is where it gets sinister, because this whole idea of looking at the world through the lens that there's this small group of conspirators, that this whole notion really began with this Jewish Masonic conspiracy idea. So they're always, without even realizing, it'd say, "Oh no, I'm not Joe Rogan would say, "No, I'm not an anti-Semite. I don't believe." He doesn't realize that this structure of thought that he's projecting. Same thing with Steve Greer and the disclosure movement and the way they talk about capitalism. They don't realize this whole thing comes from this anti-Semitism that comes out. I mean, when Karl Marx wrote Religion is the Opium of the People, I think it was his essay on the Jewish question, and it was very stridently anti-Semitic. Of course, Karl Marx was a Jew, but he was raised as a Christian because his mother and father converted to Christianity. But this is very, very strange that some of the most virulent anti-Semitic language is in early Marx's writings. And of course he's moving towards socialism, and socialism's association with anti-Semitism goes back to Marx, goes back to these ideas, and so this is developed all the while, and this is why the Russians, Alexander Dugin and Arctos Journal, Arctos Publishing, you find that there is this the alt-right with the same kind of view of the universe and how it works. And it's very subtle ties to people like Yaki, Francis Parker Yaki, the American Nazi theorist, considered the greatest Nazi philosopher since Hitler, right? He committed suicide in a San Francisco jail, I think in 1961, 60. These people, it is this conspiracy theory which tracks back to Beryl, Abbey Beryl and to Robeson, and the cobbling together of this. When I spent months in the UCI Research Library looking through this literature and finding, well, that's bogus. This is not. These are lies, and and to where you get just before World War II, you got Japanese and German propaganda literature printed in English claiming the Rockefellers are Jews, the Pierponts, the Morgans, the whole elite of America, everybody's Jewish. And there's even the anti-Semites would then claim, the Nazi anti-Semites would claim that Stalin was a Jew. After all, his name was Jugashvili, his real name, his Georgian name. It's ridiculous that the whole Politburo and the Bolshevik Revolution was Jewish. And of course, even Alexander Solzhenitsyn in, 200 Years Together, his essay points out that no, the Jews were brought into the Bolshevik Revolution when there was a strike of government workers, and they needed literate people to take these positions, and they just hired Jews to come in. It's not. It's
we
not
collectively.
so
people who have an audience, people who have expertise, people who just want to be active in society and politics and whatever. We are supposed to find the psychos, the spies, the traitors. This is what we're supposed to look for, what we're supposed to find, but we're encouraged to chase ghosts, to chase the elders of Zion, ancient aliens, UFOs, magic mumbo jumbo. We're supposed to waste our time looking for all these ghosts that don't really exist. And we don't have the time, we don't have we don't make the effort, we don't have any resources to actually chase and find the psychos and the traitors. And the concept of, well, a conspiracy is like, there's an entity, a government entity, or a part of the government, or a part of a corporation, and they're making a plan, they're executing the plan. I mean, yeah, that's a kind of a simple concept. But here's the thing. One traitor, one high-placed mole can change the power dynamic between the East and the West, and we saw that in the Cold War when that Navy guy, for example, when he sold all the secrets that he could to the Soviet Union, because I think he was a bircher, he was a conspiracy theory guy, and he thought everything is better than America. Anything is better than this Zog-infested American government, so he's going to work for the Soviets and be paid for it, right? So he was the greedy one, he was the guy selling out his fellow Americans, and people try to analyze his treason when it became known, and they thought, well, to some degree he shifted the power dynamic between the East and West. That's one guy. And imagine if somebody is placed even higher than that. This one guy can change things by selling secrets, but then from the outside, it may seem like a whole government entity is involved in a conspiracy because things just go so wrong. In war times, operations don't work out as well, and there's failures, and the economy gets sabotaged, and the education system gets sabotaged, and everything gets sabotaged. So people will, based on the indoctrination, will assume it must be a specific type of conspiracy. It must be X amount of people in the know doing this, but it may be just one mole, one traitor. And this is like a traditional spy thing that all these conspiracy people, they never really understood, I think, because they haven't read the literature on what we know about espionage.
Well, what I should note is if people want to understand how deep this goes into the psyche of the nations, of the Gentile nations, there's a play by Christopher Marlowe, who some believe is actually was the guy who wrote Shakespeare, because he wasn't killed in a bar brawl, as some people claim. Christopher Marlowe was a spy of the English crown, and that is known. But this Jew of Malta, and of course you've got the Merchant of Venice, which was written by Shakespeare, which portrays Jews in this way that people saw them then, and it's worth reading this play. The play opens.
It became the template, yeah. It became the template for later conspiracy media. Of course,
the play, The Jew of Malta, by Christopher Marlowe, opens with this character, Machiavelli, based on Machiavelli. The ghost of Niccolo Machiavelli really introduces the tragedy of the Jew. And of course, Machiavelli expresses the cynical view that power is amoral, saying, quote, "I count religion but a childish toy, and told there is no sin but ignorance." Of course, a view attributed to Machiavelli. So this Jew's name is Barabbas, a name you can get out of the Bible, right? and he's stripped of all he has for protesting against the governor of Malta's seizure of the wealth of the country's whole Jewish population to pay off the warring Turks. And so he develops a murderous streak by which he wants to get revenge. And of course, he engages in all these conspiracies to destroy all the Christian people that he meets. And it's a horror show, right? And
Yeah, and also
it's like in the Merchant of Venice, the Jew loans money and wants a pound of flesh if the money can't be paid, taken off of the, and it's grisly. You're going to take a pound of flesh out of somebody's gut, right? I mean, it's grisly, and this is a portrayal of these people. And of course, this is great literature. This is Shakespeare. This is Marlowe.
Yeah, I mean the old anti-Semitism was very, very basic and very fairy tale like, and so in the later stages it was turned into a more worldly sounding thing, and it was better storytelling, like in the Merchant of Venice and some other pieces of questionable art. So you had like an elimination of the overt fairy tale elements. It seemed more political and worldly and present, but there was also storytelling, like in a modern Hollywood movie. It was just like the characters and how they look and how they sound. It's almost like a contemporary movie, right? When they create these characters. And so it became this professional thing. But people a lot of people, they never really learned about the nature of espionage, because you don't learn it at school. And when you are an adult and you have a job and you have a family, there's a very limited amount of time that you can spend on educating yourself, right? So it's
considered morally corrupting. I mean, if you taught some of these practices to children about deception and lying and pretending to be something you're not, I mean, horrifying, really.
Yeah, and so think about the sheer numbers, the statistics of how this game is played, right? So let's say you have Joe Schmo from Idaho, and he has a job, a family, things to renovate in his home. So he has a fixed number of hours each week that he can spend on listening to programs, watching programs, reading books, trying to educate himself, right? It's a limited amount of time, because he also has to spend private time with family members and friends, so socializing. So this is like a small section of his time that he can use for political relevant programs or content, right? So this is the time that he has, and it's also the money that he has. He doesn't have much money left to spend on political material, buying books, creating a library. So if this conspiracy material and what the Russians like us to watch, what the Russians want us to watch and read, if this material is so much and it's free and it seems entertaining and riveting and it's tailored to your specific tastes, right? This will eat up your time, your already small amount of time that you have in your week, and then that whole time that's available to you, that is used up. And also, some people have maybe $50 a week for political engagement, or maybe $100 a week for political engagement, this, that, and the other. But if you spend it on, let's say, Alex Jones's fertility pills, that money is gone. Your time, the resources is gone. I did some of the numbers, when Alex Jones was being sued for the Sandy Hook content. There was a core audience of 3 million people, right? This is the people that listen almost every day. So just for the sake of a little calculation here, 3 million people, mostly in America, 3 million people, they watch if they just watch 1 hour of Jones content per day. Try to calculate how many hours per year are wasted.
Oh,
that's a
my gosh.
Staggering number. 3 million hours, 3 million hours per day.
I did an interview last night with a wonderful Christian man who had broadcasts out of Indonesia, and he mentioned in the middle of the broadcast, well, I'm always watching Alex Jones, I'm always paying attention to his, and it just staggered me. And of course, we discussed the Kennedy assassination on there, and I had the night before, 2 nights ago, I debated Fetzer, Dr. James Fetzer, on the Kennedy assassination. And I was really shocked because I would talk about the facts of the assassination. Well, Oswald bought the rifle. His palm print was on the rifle. His fellow employees saw him go up to the 6th floor of the book depository building. The shell casings were on the floor of the fired rounds.
It's traditional Marxist Leninist terrorism strategy.
Yeah, I mean, and he was a Marxist. He was a self-taught Marxist from the age of 15. This is known by all the people that knew him personally.
This is what communists do. They assassinate heads of state if they're able to do so. This is Marxism-Leninism.
Yeah. And of course, Oswald had defected to the Soviet Union. He had a Soviet wife, Marina Oswald. And then when he fled the book depository building before they sealed it off to question everyone. He fled that building. He got a pistol. He was headed for God knows where to escape.
Mexico and then Cuba, maybe
Mexico,
Soviet Union.
And maybe there was a plane come to pick him up because there was a Cuban who he had met in the Soviet Union who flew to Texas that day and then flew back without him. Was there an escape? I don't know. But Oswald was stopped when he was walking on foot by Officer Tippit. He shot Officer Tippit dead. And these conspiracy people have slandered Tippit, claiming that he was in a conspiracy with Oswald and got shot because he was part of the conspiracy, which caused enormous grief to Tippit's widow. I mean, really, seriously, you're talking about real living people and their husbands. I mean, Tippit he was considered a model policeman, and here he was shot dead. And there were many witnesses who heard the shots, saw Oswald running away from the scene with a pistol in his hand, saying, "Poor dead cop," And he ran into a theater, which someone saw him running in without paying and thought it was suspicious, heard the sirens. They surrounded it, and he resisted arrest. When a cop came and sat next to him in the theater, and he realized it was a cop, he punched him, tried to pull out the pistol, and they had to wrestle the pistol out of his hand. So, I'm not resisting, and somebody calls up and said, well, Oswald was shouting in the theater, I'm not resisting. I said, yeah, after he resisted and he stopped resisting and they were beating on him because he tried to shoot a cop, of course he shouted that because he wanted them to stop beating him because he was resisting. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing the way.
Yeah, and also the motivation of trying to just quickly to interject. I mean, of course, there's if the president gets shot, right, and the suspect had all these ties to the Soviet Union, of course the American government was very, very careful in how to handle this subject, and they were holding back some information, covering some things up, yes, because it's the Soviet Union. You don't want to publicly accuse them.
Well, it's sources and methods, and you could get World War III because World War I started from an assassination and all that, and I explained all that. But, all these details, every detail, what Fetzer would not address any of the facts. He wouldn't talk about Tippit. He wouldn't talk about any of that stuff. He just went off into the fairyland of there were 6 assassins, 6 shooting at the president in the same 8.4 second moment. Imagine you have 6 assassins. What are they? They're looking at their watches to exactly start shooting in the same 8.4 seconds. And he claims there were like 6 shots fired at the president, and the president got hit on the side of the head because one of the motorcycle guys pulled out. I couldn't follow it. The Mossad, of course, the anti-Semitic thing pops up. Isn't it funny? One of the assassins was a Mossad because Kennedy didn't want Israel wanted to get the bomb.
Yeah, the nuclear
get an atomic bomb, and Kennedy was going to stop him, so they had to kill Kennedy. I mean, the theory is that everybody who had a political disagreement with Kennedy had somebody there to shoot him on that day. So 6 different organizations, 6 groups. And it's like, this is impossible. How are you going to keep this thing secret? It's ridiculous. One man with the idea of shooting the president in his head could keep it secret. And maybe if the Secret Service met him in in Mexico City.
And also let's get real. I mean, if let's say some magic fairy tale country was really really angry at Kennedy and just wanted to take revenge, wanted to take him out because that taking out Kennedy would somehow magically benefit that magical angry country. There was so many other ways if that magical country was everywhere and had spies everywhere and is embedded everywhere.
Yeah.
There's so many more elegant ways to take somebody out of circulation, just to
you could destroy their reputation. You could create
poison them, secretly poison them with something.
Oh, that would be much better.
Didn't the magical Mossad have assets in the Secret Service or otherwise close to Kennedy? I mean, wouldn't that be elegant? Wouldn't that be professional?
Yeah.
No, you shoot him with multiple teams in broad daylight in front of the whole world. Just come on. I mean, it's like...
But psychologically, you could see that the animation for Dr. Fetzer... Now, Dr. Fetzer accused me of being dishonest. And I can't believe this because the only physical evidence we have are the bullets and bullet fragments from Oswald's gun. Or rifle, I shouldn't call it a gun, from Oswald's rifle that Oswald bought, for $12 and something cents on a mail order deal. We have a photograph of Oswald holding the rifle in his hand. We've got the testimony of his wife, Ruth Payne, who his wife was living with. We've got Robert Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's brother, believed he was guilty. His wife, coming back from seeing him in jail after he was arrested, believed he was guilty. According to their close friend, he wrote his book. I've got it here. Paul, I'm forgetting his last time I read his book. Very good book. He spent the summer of '62 with the Oswalds. He believed they were guilty. He was with them. I mean, everybody that knew them personally knew that they believed he was guilty. I mean, he kept the murder weapon in Ruth Payne's garage.
And he almost shot a politician in Texas, I believe it was.
A John Birch Society leader in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who was, what was his name? He was a U.S. general. He tried to shoot him through his window and he moved at the last minute. And that was always, did he do that? Well, Marina Oswald, her testimony to the police, as I recall, was that she suspected he had done that because the reason why is that he had told her at the time of that attempted assassination of that John Birch Society leader, he had told her that if she heard anything, she was to go to the Soviet embassy and get out of the country, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many details that, and the thing is, this is a fantastic. Dr. Fetzer says there's 6 people, not Oswald, 6 people there to shoot him. They all took shots. Oswald was a patsy. Oswald didn't take any shots. It's like, where's the physical evidence of 6 other shooters in that 8.4 seconds when the only physical evidence, reliable witness testimony and physical evidence we have? Oswald, not only that morning, he goes to work with something long like a rifle, but it's wrapped up. You can't see what it is because he carpooled. He didn't have a. So they ask him, "What do you got wrapped up there, Lee?" Because he's bringing the rifle to work when he's carpooling, and they say, "Oh, these are curtain rods for my wife."
And he always wanted to be.
What do you think? He had really curtain rods?
In his own words, he always wanted to be a big shot. A legendary historical figure in the Marxist Leninist movement. And what do Marxist Leninists do? They try to assassinate heads of state and other important people to
revolutionary.
Create a situation of civil war, have a revolution, and take over. This is what Marxist Leninists do. This is just their game. It's like when something dramatic happens, like an assassination attempt or a new head of state or some head of state does something that people don't like, there's always this default. Well, there must be the Jewish conspiracy, right? This must be the Jewish conspiracy. When Trump does something that people like, they say, oh, he's fighting the New World Order, meaning he's fighting the elders of Zion, the windmills of Zion. But when Trump does something they don't like, they say, oh, well, he has Jewish people who are in positions in his cabinet, and they advise him, and Trump has been a Zionist. So when Trump does something they don't like, they say, well, this is the Jewish Chabad influence, blah, 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 blah. Whatever suits their agenda at this particular moment. And it's like, recently we had this election in Canada. And so the headline said this leftist guy won, Mark Carney, a leftist guy won in Canada because of Trump, because Trump was saying all these things about Canada. Well, this is like, it's much more complicated than that. But when we look at that guy, I mean, he's a leftist. He's a leftist, Mark Carney. And so what will the influencers say on the internet? They will say he's working for the elders of Zion. He's working for the Jewish conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
But look at this guy.
Let me just hold on a second. Let me just read this. Sorry about that. My camera just, sorry about that. Don't go to my camera. It's looking at my eyeballs.
It's like a Sergio Leone close-up.
Yeah, against Satan and the Alliance Israelite Universelle. This is, again, Warrant for Genocide, Norman Cohn. In the Middle Ages, Jews had been seen as agents of Satan, devil worshippers, demons in human form. It is one of the achievements of the modern anti-Semitic movement that in the late 19th century it was able to revive this archaic superstition.
Yeah, it's just adapting, right? It's just adaptive storytelling. People already believed in the devil and demons, so why not just combine some things, right?
An old mythology revived.
Yeah, but if you look at a guy like Mark Carney, and who knows what this guy is going to do to Canada, right, in the coming years, right? Because Canada is in that whole battleground where the North Pole is in the center, and there's Russia, and there's Canada and the United States. So it's important to the United States what happens in Canada. So if Mark Carney does something that's terrible, the influencers will say he works for the Elders of Zion. But look at this guy. He studied at Harvard University, graduated in '87 with a bachelor's degree, then undertook postgraduate studies at the University of Oxford, got some more degrees, and then he spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs, which, we got the whole Sidney Weinberg story when Sidney, I think it was Sidney Weinberg, when he was in charge of Goldman. I've explained this before, right? Goldman became an instrumental tool of the whole United States effort to fight the Nazis, right? To have a bank that was reliable and integrated with these other large American corporations to produce for the war effort. Airplanes, tanks, trucks, this, that, and the other. And it worked like a charm because, Americans, this was done very professionally. And this is how Goldman became a bigger thing. And even this Sidney Weinberg character said, well, in wartime, I would take on any job for the government, any job. In peacetime, no, I would not take any job in government. But in wartime, I would take every job in government. And so this was like just part of the American effort, right? But so Mark Carney, who's now won the election in Canada, he spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs. But people say he's a leftist, okay? So leftist guy, elite background, most expensive degrees you can get in the world. Then he spends 13 years at Goldman Sachs working in London, New York City, Tokyo, Toronto. And so, he worked on South Africa's post-apartheid venture into international bond markets. Was involved in
which is a very tricky thing because the South African government under the ANC is just
Nelson Mandela,
an infiltrated arm of the South African Communist Party.
Yeah,
and that's just a fact.
Yeah,
South
Nelson
Africa
Mandela
is part of the communist bloc.
Yeah,
Mandela was a Marxist Leninist.
Yeah, Nelson Mandela. I mean, he's still hailed as this great pacifist, but he was just part of this calculated operation.
He was a terrorist. He was a communist terrorist.
Somebody in Moscow decided, okay, let's not do the usual thing in South Africa where we have the Communist Party and the militant arm, the terrorism, and blah 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 blah. Let's just give it a nicer face. Let's not go with the South African Communist Party. Let's just put more resources into the ANC and make it all seem peaceful because it's more advantageous at this stage. And this is how Nelson Mandela became this big hero. But and then Carney.
Well, race became the thing to be leveraged because the South African Communist Party started out as a white workers movement. So it was mainly white people. Well, what they found is that the white workers were making a lot of money. They were prosperous. That was a loser's bet. The too few white people wanted to have a communist revolution. Well, who were the dispossessed? The blacks.
Yeah.
So, of course, the blacks were people were walking barefooted from Kenya to get jobs. Blacks were in South Africa. I mean, because the working in the mines was a great deal because sub-Saharan Africa was so poor, but they could leverage these people because, of course, there was racism. White people and black people are different, and they don't always mix that well, especially in Africa. And so, what did you have? You had to go with the ANC. It had to become a black thing, and racism became the great tool of communism in a lot of the colonial areas, and also in the United States with the Black Panther movement and the attempt to mobilize blacks in the civil rights movement was heavily infiltrated by the communists. Not that the civil rights movement was communist, it wasn't, but they wanted to get a piece of that so that they could get credibility, street creds from that.
So this is what Carney was involved in when he was at Goldman. He was also involved in Goldman's work with the 1998 Russian financial crisis. Okay, in 2003, Carney left Goldman to join the Bank of Canada as a deputy governor, and then recruited to the Department of Finance. Blah blah blah. Senior associate deputy minister. The Bank of Canada is a crown corporation, structured like private companies, but are directly and wholly owned by the Canadian federal government or a Canadian provincial government. And in 2007, Carney was appointed governor of the Bank of Canada. Carney was chairman of the Bank for International Settlements' Committee on the Global Financial System in the 2010s. Carney was a member of the Group of 30, international body of leading financiers and academics, blah, 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 World Economic Forum, annual meetings of the Bilderberg Group. In 2012, Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, now we're talking Britain, announced the appointment of Carney as governor of the Bank of England. So basically the center of this whole offshore corporations, offshore banking, not paying taxes, the good old boy system. It's very European. So if you're in the club, you don't pay taxes.
But there's money laundering in these banks because of the massive drug trafficking. And we don't know who in the banking industry is really corrupt and involved in the money laundering of the drug.
I mean,
we've got the Soros fund in the Netherlands and Tilly's, which is suspect to me. But again, these are not transparent financial entities because they're out, they're offshore.
Yeah, so who's running it, who's controlling it, and who may be simply a traitor, who may be simply a mole, right, for, let's say, the Russians or the Chinese, right? This is all that you have to run all these scenarios, look for evidence, and just be professional about it. So he succeeded Sir Mervyn King. He was the first non-Briton to be appointed to the role since the Bank of England was established in 1694. Hang on, he's supposed to be a traditional leftist, Marxist, whatever, and he leads the Bank of England, the heart of international offshore capitalism. How does that work? Interesting. Now, of course, the conspiracy buffs will say, well, the tiny little Rothschild family, they took over the Bank of England and the City of London and all the British Empire, which is totally not the case.
The Rothschilds are nothing in the banking industry.
Totally not the case.
Now.
The Brits, especially the aristocracy, this very, very, very old and very large aristocracy, they built the Bank of England, they built the offshore system, they built the bond market, and they needed some phony private, quasi-pseudo-private merchant banks. So people would say, well, it's private enterprise. It's not all government. We can't look into their books because they're private, right? So you had like Barings and Rothschild, all very controlled. So then, according to Carney, in 2012, Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper asked Carney, who was then governor of the Bank of Canada, if he would join the conservative government as Minister of Finance. Okay, he married Diana Fox, the daughter of Christopher Fox, Jennifer Atkinson, who managed an estate when she was born. The family had purchased a lucrative pig farm, attended Oxford. Diana and her sister attended Oxford High School for Girls. Marlborough College in Wiltshire. Her sister Tania would go on to marry Robin Kaiser, the third Baron Rotherwick. Okay, what's going on? I thought he was a traditional leftist. What's going on here? That's very elitist. He's not a worker. He's not a leftist academic. He's not your traditional rebel rouser who wants to, does the usual thing. Very elite background, at the heart of capitalism. Now he's supposed to be a left guy. What's going on? And we can't just default to that argument, well, because of the Rothschild thing, it's the Jewish conspiracy, so Mr. Carney works for the Jewish conspiracy. I'm suspecting we have a far worse mole situation than ever before in Britain. Now, worse than Lord Louis Mountbatten, worse than the Cambridge Five, worse than the old head of MI5. I think it's worse today. And if you have high-placed moles, high-placed traitors who made a deal with the Soviets back then, or may have a new deal with the Russians now, or maybe the Chinese, if you have these moles, they can install or protect other moles. And this is how you get a massive problem. And then when somebody, doesn't have to be Mark Carney, when somebody who's a mole does something that is terrible, sucking the life out of the population, just greedy corporations, working with the government, just bleeding people dry, making terrible foreign policy. When they do something horrible, then people are told, well, this is a traditional conspiracy, in the classic sense of the Elders of Zion. This is all a big conspiracy, and we have to break down the system, destroy the system, and work with the Russians and the Chinese because they're the only hope we have to fix this mess. But it's the whole mole problem, the traitor problem, that can look like, to the uneducated public that's listening to influencers on the web, that can seem like a traditional conspiracy in the mythological sense. But it's an espionage problem. It's not a windmills of Zion problem. It's an espionage problem. So who is Mark Carney working for? I don't know yet. We may never know. But there's different possibilities. And it's even more complicated than Russian espionage, Chinese espionage, this espionage, British espionage. There's also older networks that historians have never really understood in terms of intelligence. That makes it even more complicated. That makes it more complicated. And we expect some people on the internet with a YouTube degree in history, we expect them to tell us who they work for?
Well, the thing is, we know that YouTubers have been paid, or internet podcasters have been paid by the Russians to put out a certain point of view. And the Russians are very well aware of the power of anti-Semitism as a way to influence the mob, right? We've got, under modern plutocratic democracy, we've got an ochlocratic, mob rule kind of thing, with the media guiding the mob. And you have the underside of the media, which is this dark, the Alex Jones, what the John Birch Society, and I should say, people are saying, people are going to attack me and say, Nyquist is wrong. The John Birch Society isn't a conspiracy theory. They're not anti-Semitic. Look, you don't understand the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society leaders
are all everywhere.
The John Birch Society is very deceptive, and I'm sorry that you're naive about it, but I joined it to investigate it myself. I met all the leaders, and I will tell you what Jack McManus, the longtime president of the Birch Society, told me personally when I met him at the house of Jenny Lavin for coffee and pie, and I brought the manuscript of my book, The Origins of the Fourth World War. This was in 1993, maybe. I met with McManus. So here's the president of the John Birch Society, a friend of Robert Welch, the founder of the society, and I say, would you publish this maybe? You're an anti-communist organization. I'm an anti-communist. I've written this book, Origins of the Fourth World War. I don't have to read that book because the Russian missiles don't work. It's all a fraud. The whole Cold War is fraud.
Sure.
What do you mean the Russian missiles don't work? They've had tests. We've seen them from satellites. They exploded the biggest hydrogen bomb anybody has ever exploded on Earth. I just couldn't believe this claim that the Soviets were so unable to do anything. And then he said, let me, I remember he reached back in his chair and he sat back and he put his hands like this. He said, let me scandalize you. Hitler was the dupe of the Jews. This is what he told me. I mean, I was stunned because I had read, Thunder on the Right and what the Jewish researchers had said about the Birch Society, that its leaders were secretly anti-Semites. But I wasn't sure because the John Birch Society at the time in the 90s and for many years had said, "Oh, we're not anti-Semites. We don't allow anti-Semites in our organization." Blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny. Willis Carto, one of the most famous American anti-Semites, worked for Robert Welch at one time, and of course you've got Revlo Oliver, who is famously a rabid anti-Semite who wrote for many years and was a close friend of Robert Welch, the founder of the Birch Society, for the American Opinion, and was a brilliant writer, but a mad as a balloon anti-Semite. And so here he was, Jack McManus, confessing this to me and saying Hitler was the dupe of the Jews. And he said the Holocaust didn't happen. This is what he told me. It was all to drive the Jews out of Europe, to panic into Israel, so that the conspirators could set up the footstool of the Antichrist in Israel. Well, I mean, this is just mad.
The Birch material. The Birch material is like a gateway drug, right? It's supposed to look more serious. It's like it's not so crazy like the other stuff. It's supposed to be more mass compatible, but it's a gateway drug. It's an entry drug. I mean, if you look at the most iconic books from the Birch Society, Gary Allen's Neanderthal Conspiracy and the Naked Communist book, I think it was, from the old Skousen, not the later Skousen.
Yeah, Skousen's uncle. Yeah,
they have the core. The core is intact. They say, the Rothschild family, they took it all over in Britain, and then they were in the power position to play off the kings against each other in Europe. They could decide, what king could go to war. They could decide who was going to war against whom, so they could play everybody against each other. And all these times, these kings would run out of money, so they had to borrow from the Rothschilds and other Jewish people. And so then these Jewish bankers could influence the policies of the king, blah, blah, blah. You can find the same stuff word for word in every conventional conspiracy book out there. It's word for word the same logic, and they present it as the underlying understanding of recent history.
And Dugin, it's interesting. I just want to make this point. The Dugin and Arctos and this whole Dugin operation, Dugin is reputedly a rabbi in some circles, yet he's hanging out with neo-Nazis or people on the edge of Nazism on the other side. There's this scissor strategy where they're manipulating Jewish groups, and they're manipulating, and then what they can do is they can, by getting closer to sort of some of the more extreme right-wing Jewish organizations, they can arrange events and create things that then they can present to the anti-Semites, you see, that there is this conspiracy. And it's such an elaborate, and they really go after the Catholic world because the demonization of the Jews is very much embedded in the Catholic psychology going back to the Middle Ages. And of course, the papacy has denounced anti-Semitism since, but they can revive this and use this and claim that Putin is this Christian and he's fighting anti-Semitism to the Russian anti-Semitism. Because in the 19th century, it really took hold in Russia. And the protocols of the Elders of Zion came out of Russia. This is perhaps, there's three major
product.
Nazi,
it's a product for the masses. It's not special knowledge that people magically find.
No,
it's something unique, and it's a mass product.
And the origin of the protocols, I mean, one of the things Jack McManus, I said, But Mr. McManus, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a forgery. It was proven in 1920. It was debated in the pages of the London Times. Oh no, what makes you think the Protocols are a forgery? No, the Protocols are authentic, is what Jack McManus was saying to me. He says, you've been fooled by Jewish propaganda. And it's like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding. I've seen the pages of the book that it was plagiarized out of. Conversations of Machiavelli and Montesquieu in Hell. It is easily detectable as a forgery.
And
there's
nothing really in it. It's not even there's not even a clear structure to the Protocols of Zion. It's not like they're sorted according to themes or they're sorted chronologically. It was just a gimmick, because if they had just written this text, it wouldn't. There's no gimmick there. But if they say it's a specific number of protocols, and this was a secret meeting of the Jews, and this text somehow leaked, then you have a gimmick. You can sell a gimmick. It's the explosive leak, blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing that I didn't find in one of the last shows. It says, one of our top writers at Rare Foundation, René Nall, has been banned from X after publishing an explosive expose on Russia's Alexander Dugin, and other people are supposedly getting throttled by the algorithm on X for sharing this. Let me just put that on the screen real quick.
What were they sharing?
Yeah, this is the expose that somebody got apparently banned for. Let me just pull that up on the screen so people can see this as well. So here it is. It's called. The headline is "Infiltration Alert: Russia's Alexander Dugin's sinister plot to destroy Trump's MAGA movement." Exclusive interview, and so this is about MAGA communism. And all this interesting stuff, and how this game is being played. It's a fairly long expose with sources, and so it's like if somebody, even before the election in America, people were posting the most outlandish, ultra right-wing stuff on X, and it would get a lot of views, right? So this is before the election, when these crazies were needed as voters for the GOP. After the election, the most crazy stuff got throttled as well. And I think Elon Musk said, well, it's too much negativity on X. We want to see more positive stuff, more constructive stuff. But nevertheless, this anti-Semitic old mythology stuff, that's still a mass product. You can find it anywhere, 24/7 on the internet, and there's been so much for centuries, and the new stuff is just copying and quoting the old stuff. So it seems more legit because it's so old and many people have written about it. So this is a mass product. But if you put out something relevant, something that's counterintelligence, that's supposed to untangle this espionage subversion, if you put out something relevant, somebody gets banned on X. Other people get throttled, so people don't see their stuff. They're not recommended to other people on X. So you can be on X for the most part, but nobody will see your stuff. And so it's like it's counter to the argument of the conspiracy crowd that, well, the Jewish thing is the thing you're not supposed to talk about, and if you can't talk about this Jew thing, then you know who's running everything. But really, it's everywhere. The entire Muslim world. The entire Muslim world is full of it. It's in the Muslim school books in many countries. It's on Muslim
Mein Kampf is a bestseller in the Muslim world. Mein Kampf is a bestseller.
It's on Muslim countries. It's on major television stations. It's like ingrained in Muslim culture, and there's more than 1 billion Muslims. It's everywhere. It's a mass product. But still, people think because they ruin their reputation, they are the lone
and this
heroes.
Is the point about Jack McManus, the president of the Birch Society. This is why I consider the Birch Society evil. And I know there's good people. I've known good people that have worked for it, but it's like you're not being honest. You have to be honest, because Jack McManus, what he was telling me was dishonest, completely dishonest. He was telling me, I said, okay, so what is this conspiracy really? Because he's not really worried about the Soviet Union. He doesn't think it's about communism. It's the conspiracy behind the communist conspiracy, which is the Jewish Masonic conspiracy. And he said, well, it's 9 Jewish Kabbalists, Jewish black magicians, who are ruling the world to the Masonic lodges and the banks. And this is what he told me. And he said, this is what they're doing. And it's like, if he were to publish that, honestly say what it is that he really believes, as the president of the John Birch Society, most of the members would leave.
Yeah. And everybody
so he's lying. He himself is a conspirator, lying to his own people.
I mean, for millennia. Yeah. I mean, there's even historical knowledge about the ancient world of banking and how these empires try to finance themselves. There's stuff about Mesopotamia and those empires, about the Romans, even though they were really, really careful with actual numbers and documentation, because they didn't want anybody else to know. What's the money flow? What's the money resources? Because anybody who's an enemy of the Roman Empire, either an external or an internal enemy, anybody could use that information to find out where Rome was weak. How much resources would they have? So of course they were protective of their information. They wouldn't tell everybody. So we don't have a perfect record of the the numbers and the financing of the Roman Empire, but they had to finance the whole thing. They had to see the numbers. They had to control trade and using grain as money, and then they had these gold drops as money, and just figuring out how to use these limited resources to expand the Roman Empire. And then the Europeans did it. They created banks and more banks and bigger banks. And then the British, they created this whole, on a scientific level, created the new central banking system with the bond market and the colonies. And it's like empires did that everywhere. I mean, the Asians did that, and everybody was.
The thing is, central banking is all about being able to leverage in a wartime more resources to be able to beat your enemies in a war. I mean, that's what it basically
and not lose control.
That's why everybody who's gone to war has had to adopt that system in order to keep up with the other side.
Yeah, any empire that's ever existed, any empire that's ever been meaningful had to had a significant control over money and trade and currency and paying people and running the numbers.
It's not a Jewish conspiracy, people.
It's not a Jewish invention. It's not a Jewish invention, and they didn't.
Do you know who invented it? The Dutch and the Swedes and the British were the most successful at adapting it. That's how they won the 7 Years' War, which is really the first real world war fought all over the world, where Britain and certain Germans and Frederick the Great were allies, and the colonies fought. It's when Canada, India, the Philippines, and Cuba were conquered by the British. Yeah. The British gave the Philippines and Cuba back to Spain, but they kept Canada.
How brilliant the technique is. Let's assume for a moment, Lord Louis Mountbatten. Lord Louis Mountbatten was a traitor for the Soviets, and he had a communist wife, and he ruined everything for NATO. And his buddy, close confidant, became First Secretary General of NATO. Let's assume for a moment he was a complete traitor, complete mole for the Soviets, complete traitor. So if you have somebody as a mole who is that powerful, he can protect other moles, he can install other moles. This can become a massive, massive problem, not just for Britain, but also the rest of Europe and the US. Imagine if you have a massive problem with Soviet or Russian, a massive problem with Russian moles. These moles then sabotage things, and then the propaganda says, well, all the bad stuff that's happening, that's because of the elders of Zion, and they're everywhere, and that's why we have to destroy the system and get everybody angry to destroy the system. And isn't that brilliant, right? You're using moles, and then you give a whole nother interpretation. You just reframe the whole thing and say, well, that's the, you say capitalist, pig, imperial conspiracy. The other crowd is told, no, it's a Jewish conspiracy, and the Muslims are told it's a Jewish conspiracy. I mean, it's like if you add just a few instances, if you add the word Jewish or Jew here and there, even in contemporary communist literature, it's the same, almost the same thing that the right wing is saying, minus the ethnic ethnic fanaticism of the white power movement. But in terms of, you know, the big conspiracy and it's everywhere, it's the same thing between the extreme right and the extreme left, right? It's just the communists in the, you know, like mid-1800s. In the mid-1800s, the communists decided to stop saying Jew all the time and stop, you know, using the Jew word all the time. But they just eliminated the term Jew, and what's left, the capitalist pig and imperialist. And that can be a white guy. That can be a guy that's not Jewish at all. So if you say something the extreme right doesn't like, they say you work for the Jews, you are a Jew, blah, blah, blah. If you say something the communists don't like, they say, well, you work for the capitalist pig imperial conspiracy, right? And so they also hate you. And this stuff is everywhere. This stuff is everywhere. It's a mass product, but if you actually do the Angleton thing, if you do counterintelligence, if you look for the psychos and the traitors, that's a niche, right? That's like a small, very small section of what people actually get to see on the internet and elsewhere. So what we're doing is not a mass product. It's not, you know, buttered up by Spotify. We're not getting Spotify contracts for 100 million. It doesn't magically blow up on X, and it doesn't, you know, get featured on the Alex Jones or whatever, right? And there's no magic Russian, you know, botnet that's pushing our content, and there's no click farms, you know, entire office buildings of Russian assets clicking on these videos and commenting on it, and they get like, I don't know, 20 cents, 30 cents, 40 cents for everything they click on and comment on and say, yeah, this is really awesome, I'm angry. We're not getting that. We're not getting that amplification. And it's like, it doesn't take much money to create a trend, to create something that's that catches on, because people, they are drawn to something that seems successful. They're drawn to something that they just have to join.
There's more than that. You know, this is the problem with modernity and the lowering of standards of education and thought. Hesiod had said, the ancient Greek, he had said there's three kinds of people, and I've mentioned this before. There's people who can think for themselves and come to solutions, and these are leaders, and they can enunciate things. These are the proper leaders that society should have. Then there are people who can't really think, but they can recognize those who have the right answers and will follow them. Those are the useful men. The best men are the ones that can think. The useful men are the ones that can recognize it and follow them. And then there's the useless men who can neither think nor listen to proper advice. And we have reached a point where the useless men are now running things. In the case of, I think, I see in Vance, Vice President Vance is a useless man, in my view. He can't think. I don't know about Trump. Trump is like a Mr. Magoo figure. He doesn't properly think. He doesn't have much knowledge. He has a kind of intuition, like Mr. Magoo walking through the construction site blind. You know, Magoo is an old guy who has thick glasses, but he's blind as a bat, and he goes through all these dangerous situations, and just by some kind of intuition or luck, he gets through, and he goes, "Oh, Magoo, I've done it again." You know, he somehow lives through it. This is sort of Trump as a politician. He is not Lincoln. He is not Washington. He is not the great British politicians of the 19th century with all their education. And more, these politicians we have today, one wonders what has gone into their education. It's leftist or Marxist or indoctrination, ideology, libertarianism.
Well, they got bored at university. I think they got you know, even people that became so powerful, you know, Vance and others, you know, they got bored in school.
Once you absorb ideology instead of a deep trying to understand, to grapple with history and political science, social science, once you are not able to go there, what is guiding you? You are susceptible. Your mind is open to infection.
Well, the nonsense is exciting, right? It seems so exciting.
Oh, yes.
But, I mean, the real stuff, I mean, especially in the academic world, I mean, even you know, regular, proper stuff, it can seem so boring and tedious. And I think a lot of these politicians, they got bored at university. They got
reality
bored at school.
Is prosaic and dull.
they had to do this topic, they had to write that paper, they had to submit this and that and just get it over with. But then comes the exciting stuff, right? Then comes, this idea of maybe we can. Some politicians think maybe we can do something with the Russians. Maybe we can work with them. Maybe we can shape the world and have like this world alliance, conservative world alliance that will dominate everything. Nobody can break it, and that's never existed in human history, right? When you think about the old empires and they thought they controlled most of the world, but they really didn't. But then now it seems such an attractive idea of this conservative world government, right? The United States of America turning the U.S. into some sort of a medieval system, right? It's like
this is where the Dark Enlightenment comes in, and the Dark Enlightenment. This is of course the book Dark Enlightenment, which is of course is by Nick Land, who I think somebody told me he's living in Shanghai now under the communist Chinese government, and this thing is, he's advocating a kind of race realism. There's this weird, Hitler wasn't Hitler as bad as it's argument ad Hitlerum, the modern liberal, everything against the Enlightenment liberalism, the U.S. Constitution. This is a very carefully crafted critique ideologically from the right, which basically is against the traditional, Russell Kirk, of course, Edmund Burke view of what was the right. Even, they try to adopt Thomas Carlyle, who was a very, I guess you could say, a reactionary, brilliant British-Scottish writer in the 19th century, famously wrote Sartor Resartus, The History of the French Revolution, the biography of Frederick the Great, the biography of, the life and letters of Oliver Cromwell, kind of rehabilitated Cromwell's reputation. But, and the Nazis Goebbels just loved to quote Carlyle. And so they've realized these elements, because what the Russians want to combat is not traditional conservatism with its rational attempt to see the world realistically. It wants this more ideological thing that inspired fascism, that inspired National Socialism. They want that to be the right that they're fighting. And so Dugin and his networks are trying to bring back the conspiracy theories, this negative view of the Jews, this really pre-Reformation Catholicism that would be violently against Protestantism, Atlanticism, the Anglo-Saxon establishment, so because the core enemy of Moscow and Beijing is the Anglo-Saxon Atlanticist, the NATO, America at the core of it. America is a Protestant country basically in its origins. You've got to attack that core, the heart of what America was, and you've got to turn all the Catholics, and you've got to turn all the Orthodox and all the pagans and all the New Agers. You've got to turn everybody into conspiracy theorists against this old Anglo-Saxon establishment and bring it all down, bring down Atlanticism, because you can't get them all to accept Marxism-Leninism. You can't overthrow it with just that. And the right has been so resistant and successful in look at Ronald Reagan. He emerged in the 1980s as a two-term president. He built up the U.S. military. You can't have that anymore. You have to prevent that. You have to reshape the right in America if the left and communism is ultimately going to succeed. And this is how you're going to build up the right. You're going to build up the Duginist right, which is the Dark Enlightenment right, which is the anti-Anglo-Saxon, anti-NATO, anti-Atlanticist right. And there you have the Catholic vice president, J.D. Vance, and you've got Trump, Mr. Magoo there, blindly wandering back and forth can I make Putin my friend? Can I do a reverse Nixon? Can I pull out of NATO? Can I just drop the whole alliance thing? Do I have to go to war with Russia and China? Maybe I can get America out of it, and they can all just go fight each other over there, and Europe's not paying its way, and blah, blah, blah. You see, this is so sinister. The information war is a real thing. It's a real thing, this information war, and the Russians are desperately struggling to win it while they're having this massive military buildup, even more massive military buildup in China, and starting in April, the military flights between China and Russia are expanding massively. Chinese troops showing up in Russian uniform, being captured by the Ukrainians. Massive armies beginning to be formed along NATO's borders, even reported in the mainstream press in the US. And Mr. Lee Wheelbarger saying, look, I've developed this system of tracking military movements in Russia, and they are preparing to attack NATO. And China preparing. So, as you mentioned, the war between India and Pakistan, and this thing in MAGA. You know, it's funny. Dugin, more than 20 years ago, said that we have to destroy Catholicism. Dugin said this in an interview, I think, with was it a Polish journalist? Do you remember this interview? We have to destroy Catholicism in Poland to turn Poland back into a part of the Russian Empire. We have to destroy Catholicism. But now he's trying to use Catholics to destroy Catholicism from within and to destroy America, because why destroy it in Poland? Let's just go to the source in America and destroy it in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, to some observers, I think Trump seems like a fumbling, bumbling, aging king who's just completely exhausted, and he's running back and forth, as you said. But everything, I mean, we know that he doesn't like to read the briefings, the intelligence briefings,
No, he doesn't.
what's going on in the world. So he asks somebody just to give him a short presentation of what it means. So, I mean, even if you do read these presidential briefings, it doesn't necessarily reveal sources and methods, because there's still a containment of information. And we know how Trump is acting with sensitive documents, right? I mean, he's gotten in a lot of trouble for talking about stuff from these documents and having documents in his home, apparently, and whatnot. So, I mean, you're getting maybe like a 10-minute presentation that's based on a multi-page briefing that's based on who knows how much source information. So it's like Trump would be blind without his advisors. I mean, if we see him as a fumbling, bumbling, aging king who is just exhausted, he's completely dependent on the people he works with, the intelligence agencies that provide him with information, and his these officials who say, okay, we have a few options. We could do this, that, and the other. And with the Koreans or the Russians or the Chinese, we have this option, that option. So they're presenting the menu to him, and he has to say, okay, let's go with this. Or maybe he has an idea flash in his mind. Couldn't we just do this, that, and the other? And then they say, no, it's not possible because blah, blah, blah reasons. And then here's the menu. Okay, this is what you can choose from. And then he chooses from the menu. But we in the West, we have this massive infiltration problem. We never clean house. We never got, we never got to that point where we can trust these institutions to be free of high-ranking moles, right? So this is when bad decisions are being made, or the timing is wrong, or let's say there's a significant buildup of Russian forces, but then some mole or the other, they're making key bits of information disappear, or they prolong the time it takes to be run through the system. So, or they add stuff to it, right? They put credibility on some diversion that the Russians are doing. And so what ends up happening maybe is that Trump is being told, well, yeah, there's a military buildup, but that's just for show, or that's for some other reason. It's just because the Russians are scared, blah, 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 blah. And this is how bad decisions are being made, right? Because Trump is not a spy. He's not a foreign spy on the ground who knows the ins and outs of these other countries.
Yeah. See, the thing is that people don't understand, and it's very complicated, is that Everybody wants a very simple explanation. They want to rush to the answers. Just get to the end, people will say. Just tell me what it is. This is what Vladimir Bukovsky told me when he was trying to teach people about Marxism, Leninism, and he did not believe that it was defeated in the Cold War. There was no final defeat of Marxism, Leninism. There was no Nuremberg trial of the communist officials that had perpetrated worse crimes than the Nazis had perpetrated. Of course, they had more decades in power. They could kill and torture more people, and they did, and they spread their evil ideology around the world. Nazism and communism are forms of the same kind of Eric Berglund, the German Austrian political scientist, political philosopher, called it he called it Gnosticism, because it had this quality of really hating the world the way it is, and saying that the world is evil and we need to transform the world. We need to change everything. We need to have a revolution. It's more of a metaphysical revolt, like the revolt of Satan against God. We don't like the way the world was made. We need to remake it. We need to become God. And therefore we need to kill God, right? And one of the chapters in one of Berglund's philosophical works is the murder of God. So that the Gnostics, the communists, and the Nazis are engaged in a project to murder God, so the Führer can become God, so that Hitler can become Jesus Christ. This is esoteric Nazism, right? Which is that crazy Chilean, whatever his name is. He's created this philosophy, and you've got you've got esoteric Trumpism, right? So that they're doing the same thing with Trump. They're going to make him into this messianic figure the way that they tried, the esoteric Hitlerists wanted to make Hitler. So that in 1,000 years, instead of Jesus Christ being the Messiah, Hitler is going to be mythologized, and that the Hitler's death is the, maybe they're going to say that Hitler rose again from the grave and lived in Latin America. I mean, who knows how they're going to, if let's say there's a nuclear war and everything's destroyed, and they create that, this actually gets out of the bottle and they create something like this. I mean, it's crazy. The occultism, right? That this esoteric Hitlerism, and now these same people out of Arctos Journal are creating esoteric Trumpism. The desire to manufacture myths and to perpetrate them on us. And I recommend very highly The Crowd by Gustav Le Bon. Le Bon wrote this. He was a profound anti-socialist. He wrote The Psychology of Revolutions, The Psychology of Socialism, and The Psychology of the Crowd. And he said that people are suggestible. And he said that there's such a thing as psychic contagion, where an idea, like a virus, like a bad bug, runs through these people because they're at such a low mentality. I mean, the average IQ is 100. That's not very inspiring. That's not very critical in terms of rational ability, and it runs from mind to mind, and it can infect people. And he said socialism is the great infection, whether it's National Socialism or Marxism. He saw it. Le Bon was writing in the 1890s and the early 20th century. And he said, look, it's a contagion. And he said socialism is unstoppable. It appeared to him, and he was a witness of the Communist Commune in Paris. This is when he began thinking about this. He was French. And he said, look at this commune in Paris. This was a virus. This was something dangerous. We haven't seen the last of this. This is going to take over people's minds. And the idea that socialism has ever defeated this infestation, because the modern mind, dislocated it as it is from traditional ideas, and no longer grounded in deeper philosophy and theology, is extremely susceptible to this toxin. And it's in the Democratic Party. It's in now the Republican Party and the MAGA movement, because what do they say? It's populism, but it's, as Nietzsche would say, it's resentment. What is Marjorie Taylor Greene? She's a conspiracy theorist person. She resents the establishment. She resents the banks. She resents, like the Birch Society, the people that are drawn to it are people filled with resentment. One Bircher said to me, a guy who fanatically tried to convert me to Birchism, is one of the people that got me interested in figuring out these people. He once said to me, I said, why are you so fanatical in all this? And he admitted to me, he said, my father was an insect. I don't want to be an insect. Yeah.
Yeah.
I said, your father was an insect. His father was, he had a wife and a family, and of course he had a job. But it's like it's that when I found the same thing in the Marxists that I was in graduate school with, what they will tell you when they're in their cups, if you're drinking with them. I was a designated driver on these occasions. And when you hear them drunk, it's that they are struck down by the tragedy of their own smallness. Oh, yeah. They want to be Jesus Christ. They want to be God. And it's like such a tragedy. This one Marxist said to me, a Colombian Marxist, he said to me, and it just struck me at the time. It was so weird. I was young. I couldn't figure it out. I've since understood it. But he said to me, he said, nobody's going to remember me in 100 years. And I thought, and he was probably in his, 26 years old. I don't know, 25 years old. And I thought, nobody's going to remember you in 100 years. This is what's tormenting you.
This is eating you up.
This is eating you up. This is why you're into Marxism, Leninism, why you're a fanatical communist, because nobody's going to remember you in 100 years. What kind of lunatic are you? And it's just like the guy who said, my father's an insect. I don't want to be an insect. This Bircher who believed in this radical conspiracy. And I told him, I said, Brian, this stuff is coming from anti-Semitism. No, they're not anti-Semites. They're not, the conspiracy is this. It's the insiders. It's like he totally adopted the Birch and the whole Birch idea. And it's like, and just the arrogance of thinking that I'm a brilliant reasoner. I can reason out what the world is and stuff. It's like, what have you read? What history do you know? When I went to his home and I saw his books, they were all conspiracy books and nothing but. All he had read his whole life. Of course, he was a scientist. He was a graduate student in biology. But all he had read his whole life is these narrow Did you read a regular history? No, they're all the regular histories are written by conspirators. You mean Herodotus, Thucydides, all the great ancient. You get a grounding in the culture of history
just the
writing,
source material,
in philosophy. You get to know history and human nature, and you realize now this conspiracy stuff is rot. It's brain rot, and
because communism as an ideology, it's a mass product. Conspiracy mythology is a mass product. That means no matter how much you sacrifice for these movements, you will not be remembered in 100 years. You will not be remembered in 5 years. I mean, you're supposed to be this little.
Well, you especially won't be remembered if you believe something ludicrous. There was no moon
landing. In all probability, you will be this tiny little small cog and quickly forgotten, and you don't get what you want. There was this thing this week on the Wall Street Journal. It says how Vladimir Putin keeps Russia's battle-hardened veterans on his side. So basically, what they're doing now is they're creating some, just like in Soviet days, they're creating some celebrities. These are people who sacrificed for, Mother Russia, either as, back in the old days, it was the factory workers who were miracle guys because they worked like 10 other people, right? And they got the fame and the recognition. And so now it's these veterans, these war veterans, some of them are turned into celebrities, and they're showered with attention and money. And so this is like the gamble now for the average Russian soldier to become one of those guys. But it's like winning the lottery. It's if you are one of the few chosen ones, you get to be paraded in front of the cameras. But it's almost nobody who gets to that point. They talk about Major Amir Argamakov. He was active in military service in Chechnya, Syria, Ukraine. He was invited to the World War II Victory Day parades in Moscow's Red Square. Now he's a politician, and he's a 30-year-old. And so now they create celebrities, put them into government positions, and And even, I mean, it's even possible, like in the old days, Soviet days, to fabricate these heroes. I mean, you can falsify somebody's records. If somebody looks good in front of the cameras and he's got some military service, you can falsify the records. You can, exaggerate his achievements and create this Superman hero figure for the cameras. No problem whatsoever. And it says here, in the 1980s and early 1990s, returning veterans of the Soviet war in Afghanistan were often treated as second-class citizens, almost no psychological support, widespread stigma about the wounded, a trend that is showing few signs of improvement today. Some veterans ended up organizing into political factions that sought to challenge Soviet rule and accelerate its collapse, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, there's almost no psychological treatment today. If you're traumatized as a Russian soldier by the Ukraine war, there's really no real help for you. And if you got, blown out knee, elbow problems, shoulder, this, that, shell shock, this, that, and the other, well, good luck getting medical treatment because the government doesn't have the money to properly treat you. But now they're creating some celebrities.
And not only that, they leave the bodies of the dead on the battlefield for the Ukrainians to pick up because they don't want to pay the relatives the death benefits. This is
they're
what
just
the Russians
MIA
do.
now. They're just MIA.
Yeah. And so it's just appalling. But anyway, we've come to the end of our time. We've been going more than 2 hours, and this has been an interesting discussion. I think what people need to understand, there's millions of people in all over Europe and North America, all over the world, and the Muslim world especially, who are going to, if they listen to this, they're just going to turn it off because what we're saying is against what they believe.
The magic.
Anti-Semitism or the conspiracy theory of history is their religion. 9/11 was an inside job. The JFK assassination had 6 assassins, including the Mossad, that did not include Lee Harvey Oswald. Was not even shooting that day. He was a patsy. I mean, and of course the moon landing didn't happen because the Americans aren't that great. The Americans faked it because the Americans are fake, and America is a horrible fraud. And on and on it goes. Everything's the Great Depression was a conspiracy of the Jews. World War I was a Jewish plot. World War II was a Jewish plot. They went to get Hitler, who was the guy that was going to save the world from the Jewish Masonic conspiracy. And now we've got it. It's erupted again. Modernity cannot shake this demon, and I don't know. You can't. We're living in a period of rising irrationality. And the irrationality is so deep, I can't penetrate it. I've had my name plastered all over Twitter, race traitor, Jewish shill, a Zionist, liar, horror, traitor. I've had, and I complained to Twitter. I said, "You're going to let these rabid anti-Semites smear me on Twitter? What are you going to do about it?" They wouldn't do anything. They kicked all my friends off. For talking out of school about the pandemic, but they wouldn't kick these rabid anti-Semites off Twitter for slandering me. It's just bizarre the whole way the world works, both the left and the right, and the way the manipulations, and as you say, agent networks being involved, and you get out. I'm trying. Look, I'm not perfect. I don't know everything. I'm trying to figure things out, but I'm honest. I'm trying to do it. I'm trying not to hurt anybody or slander anybody. I'm trying to be honest. And if I make a mistake, please call me on it. But these people that do this lying and all of this weird theorizing, they got massive following, massive financing, massive money. And there I am, and I'm trying, but it's like, no, I might be noted after I'm dead, but right now I can't get anywhere. I mean, I don't know, a couple thousand readers, not enough money to pay my grocery bill. It's like, this is what you do when you're trying for the truth. You just get attacked and plowed under. But these people, Alex Jones, a horrific liar, I mean, he wasn't sued for almost $1 billion because he's an innocent guy. He's a horrific liar, a horrific propagandist for terrible people, Russians all over his staff, defending Russia's invasion of Georgia,
in 2008, yeah.
In 2008. I mean, and this guy is famous and made all this money. I mean, and he's on Joe Rogan, smoking pot and drinking liquor with Joe Rogan. I mean, so he's a celebrity. He's an important person. What is the intellectual content? It's zero. He's a fraud, but he has massive following. This is what is wrong with mass society. This is what the demoralization, the intellectual corruption, the moral corruption of what you listen to that you ought to know is not true, and what you think is true that in your corrupt intellect have accepted and embraced will destroy you, will destroy America, will destroy the West, and hand everything over to the Russians and Chinese. Are you that simple? Are you that? I mean, if you can't cheat an honest man, you're being cheated. I don't think you're honest. This is my message to millions of people now. I have to say it. It's horrible. It destroys me. I get no profit out of it. I have no pleasure in it. In the origins of the Fourth World War, I go through this. If this plays out, we're destroyed. They're making nuclear weapons. Trump won't do it. The only nuclear weapon we're working on is a gravity bomb? You think a plane with modern anti-aircraft missiles can get over a target enough to drop a gravity atomic bomb?
Yeah, right.
No more new nuclear weapons for missiles? No new ICBMs? No new boomers? What are we doing here? They're outpacing us. The Russians are building up on NATO's border. You're going to ally with Russia? You really think you can trust Vladimir Putin, the guy who's lied and broken every treaty and just cynically sits up there with his friend Xi Jinping?
And it's so easy. It's so easy to just listen to bad programs, right? You're in the car, you're at home, you're in the garage working on something, and you just listen to bad programs, and
titillating.
You get the feeling that you're doing something. You get the feeling that you're involved, that you are part of something, and but you're not. You're not doing anything. You're not using your time right. You're not using your resources right.
No.
And it's like this oversaturation that I talked about. It's like it's such an easy technique. You just pour more money and more support into these well-established phony categories of thought, and you drown out the good stuff. And most people will never actually grab a really good book. Just make a cozy, productive reading space for themselves and say, this is the place where I can focus on a book and my own thoughts about it, and actually start to understand anything and upgrade my brain, upgrade my understanding. So the software that I'm running is more capable and makes less errors. So easy. It's so easy and to just consume the stuff that's out there. And it's always a mass product. It's always a mass product.
Yeah. Well, anyway, folks, I want to thank you for joining us. This has been Friends and Enemies, where we talk about the fact that the fundamental political distinction is between friends and enemies, and that we're confused on that issue. And I'm Jeff Nyquist here in the United States. My co-host in Germany is Alex Benesch. And thanks for joining us. Hope you'll join us next week.